Right, guys, the second and third ones probably take a little bit more longer, or a little bit longer, because there are a few different topics combined together, whereas dictatorship is really one topic. Okay, so again, a bit longer, but bear with me. Again, right. So this word here, totalitarianism, it's the government that controls every aspect of an individual's lives, right? So it's how Hitler and the Nazis are trying to take control of absolutely everything. So when you get into the Nazi period, it's all about how they control things, and it's all about Nazi life. And the first thing you need to really know is this police state, and it's threefold really: the SS, the SD, the Gestapo, and remember, you can also add in the concentration camps to this. But I want you to think of one word that links to all of them, and that is fear. Right? That's how they control them. It's through fear. So as soon as the Enabling Act was passed, the Nazis established a new kind of prison, and this is the concentration camps, to basically get rid of any of their political or ideological and racial opponents. A place to put them. And these are located in the isolated areas, outside, away from the public gaze. It was people kind of knew about them, but it was rumors, right? And it was this fear of this horrendous place that you could go to if you go against the Nazis. And these work in the camps were hard. Some were really pointless. But as war started ramping up, the SS used the camp inmates as like forced labor for producing things like army uniforms, etc. And then you start putting in the Jews, and it all leads to this final solution, which would be to eradicate the Jews. Right, a few things. So the SS. Now, again, please pause it and read back through the content for the SS, but I've bullet pointed the key things here. They're Hitler's private police force. They are totally loyal to Hitler and Himmler. They were used to crush the SA in the United the Long Knives, and you've got 240,000 members in the 1920s put in charge of all security. Now, importantly here, they believe they are above the law. Okay, so they believe they're superior to regular police, right? They can do what they want. Then you've got the SD. Now remember, the SD, they are the planners, really. Okay, so they're formed by Himmler. Now they are going to monitor opponents of the Nazi regime. Heydrich becomes their leader. Don't worry too much about Heydrich. If you're going to guess, just put Himmler. They kept cards on everyone suspected of being the Nazis, and these were kept at the Brown House, the headquarters of the Nazi Party in Munich. So they have these cards with data of who the enemies of the Nazi. So the Gestapo, remember, like the secret police, they are the plainclothes policemen. Heydrich becomes leader in 1936. They work alongside the SS and SD. Now their role is to identify the opponents of the Nazis. They would spy on people using tapped phones and networks of informants. 160,000 people were arrested in 1939 for political offences. They were given permission to torture people. Their main weapon was fear, as people did not know who they were. They would imprison people without trial, and there was never more than 30,000 of them. All right, so that is significant to how much power the Gestapo has and how they can prey on this fear of the people. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through. I've left that kind of on for you to kind of read through. Remember, on the Teams channel, there are these slides that you can look through as well. But that gives you everything on the concentration camps. But remember, it's this idea of people know that the enemies of the Nazis are being taken to these places of horror, and that builds in this fear of the people, and fear brings with it control, and that's how the Nazis were able to implement control for this idea of fear. Now, a little bit more on the camps. By 1939, 150,000 were under protective arrest. Camps created in response to this. The first was Dachau in 1933. First women's camp was Moringen. They were in isolated areas. The inmates would be the undesirables, the minority groups, the political prisoners. Okay, so make sure you're aware of that, but make sure to think about how you can use it to show how the Nazis were able to implement control. Now, I'm going to have a look through propaganda and censorship. Remember the difference between the two. Censorship, closed mouths, right? Silence. Propaganda is purely pro-Nazi kind of ideas, okay? So just think of it that way. Censorship, propaganda, right? Okay, again, I've left on A lot of information there for you to read, but I'm going to focus on a couple of bullet points. All radio stations were under Nazi control. The Nazis and Nazi officials made frequent broadcasts. Cheap, mass-produced radios were made available. 70%, right? If you're going to note down a statistic, 70% had one. They were all short range, right? Reason they're short range is so they won't pick up foreign radio stations because they don't want that influence. Then you've got the newspapers. Again, journalists were sometimes told they could not publish. This is censorship. They were given briefings with information the government wanted to release and instructions on how to write it. It's propaganda. Any opposition newspapers were closed down. 1600 by 1935. Every newspaper was a Nazi newspaper. Then you've got the rallies. So mass rallies were bigger and more frequent than before. A mass rally was held each year at Nuremberg to advertise German strength and unity. You've got the sport. So you've got sports stadiums were covered in Nazi symbols. All the teams made the Nazi salute. You've got the Berlin Olympics. So Hitler, he highlighted the Nazis in a good way during these Olympics. The Olympic Stadium held 110,000. Germany won 33 medals. The game was filmed. Again, this is to show their might, show their strength. That's what all the Nazis are about. They want to show off their superiority, their master race, their superior hierarchical racial being. All right, that's the purpose of the Nazis. And they also threatened any negative press released before the event. So they were threatening people not to ruin this event. So censorship and propaganda in one. The arts and the culture. So it focused on these romantic ideals of the German past, idea of country life, strong families, loyalty, struggle, self-sacrifice, and discipline were emphasized. Reich Chamber of Culture was set up in 1933. The idea was to ensure cultural ideals matched the Nazi ideas. The Reich Chamber of Visual Arts was set up. Painter and sculptors had to apply to be members. 42,000 were accepted. Any who refused were banned from producing art. So in 36, 12,000 paintings were removed from galleries. The Gestapo would check on these galleries, and competitions and prizes were held. The Greater German Art of Exhibition included 900 exhibitions. Go back and just make sure, sorry, I clicked over that too fast, but go back and just make sure you're looking through the numbers there, right, guys, and highlight the numbers in your notes, right, because that's really what stands out in this Germany paper. Specific detail, specific evidence. The art and architecture. So remember, they didn't like this modernism and futuristic architecture of the Weimar Republic. They hated all that. They wanted buildings to show power. Now, the main man here is Albert Speer. He designed a lot of Nazi Germany's major buildings. So he designs the parade ground at Nuremberg, the new chancellery, so this is the office of the chancellor, and Speer used design features to shape an impression of Germany. So he had huge buildings to show power. He used ancient kind of features of ancient Rome and Greece, so domes, arches, and pillars. And he decorated his building with Nazi flags. Okay, again, to show off their might, show off their power, show off their control. So music was important for this control. So some type of music were banned, like jazz. So link that to the youth groups who use it in opposition. The work of Jewish conductors were banned, or Jewish musicians like Mendelssohn. Other music was promoted. You know, Wagner. He produced music on heroic and powerful Germans of the past. Beethoven and Bach were favoured. So think about how they're using every aspect of art and culture to dominate and promote their ideas. Literature was important, so no new books could be published without the approval of the Chamber of Culture. Books which the Nazis didn't like were censored, so 2,500 writers were banned. Millions of books were burned. In May 1933, 20,000 books of the Jews, communists, and anti-Nazi authors. Freud, Einstein, two authors whose books were burned. Right? Use these statistics. This is great evidence to show how the Nazis just eliminated any potential opposition to them. Okay. You got film. So Goebbels had control of the film industry. He wanted to promote these Nazi ideas. Films began with this 45-minute newsreel highlighting how great the Nazis were. Goebbels had to approve absolutely everything before it went out. 1,300 Nazi films were made. Some films were for entertainment, but they hadn't had this political message. So Hitler Junge Quo, where a young Nazi is killed by communists. Some were obvious propaganda, like Hansi the Canary, based on like a Mickey Mouse kind of character. Hansi had hair like Hitler in the film. He's pestered by, a visible representation of a Jew, so black crows. Control of the legal system, so how he controlled judges. So this is setting up the National Socialist League for maintaining law. All judges had to be members. If they upset the Nazis, they would be denied membership. Hitler said in a conflict between law and the Nazi Party was more important. Again, think about control, how Hitler is dominating everything here. And to do that, he is ensuring everything in this legal system is to his liking. And control the law courts. He gets rid of the jury. Remember, in a democratic system, the jury is important for a fair trial. But Hitler gets rid of them, puts the judges in charge who decide guilt. And remember, who the judge support? Well, they support the Nazis. Hitler sets up the new People's Court to hear cases of treason. Judges, again, picked by the Nazis. Sometimes Hitler would even make judgments himself. Again, absolute control here. And people couldn't even appeal. Again, this is all rigged to Hitler's power base. It's all rigged to Hitler's complete domination. Again, Hitler then goes to control the religious views, and especially the Christianity. I'll leave that on for you guys to read. Now, the Catholic Church, be aware of how the problems arise with the Catholic Church. So on social issues, Catholics owed their first allegiance to the Pope rather than Hitler, which Hitler doesn't like. And Catholics had their own schools, which taught values different from the Nazi state schools. So remember, Hitler doesn't want this because he wants control, right? He doesn't want any other power to contradict what he's saying. Now, initially, he makes a concordat with the Pope. Now, this is an agreement where Hitler would confirm freedom of worship for Catholics and not interfere with Catholic schools in Germany. And the Catholic Church agreed that its priests would not interfere in politics and ordered German bishops to swear loyalty to the National Socialist regime. However, again, Catholic priests were just harassed here and arrested. Many ended up in concentration camps. Catholic schools were brought in line with the state schools or closed, and Catholic youth activities such as like Catholic Youth League were banned. And eventually, Pope Pius realized this agreement with the Nazis was worthless, and he issues this stinging criticism against the Nazis, with his burning anxiety. So again, anything on the Catholics, you've got everything you need there. The Protestant Church. So when you think of the Protestant Church, you need to be looking at the Reich Church. So this was where the Nazis combined in 1936 to form a single Protestant church called the Reich Church, and its leader is Ludwig Müller. Now, Hitler made Müller the Reich Bishop of Germany. Protestant pastors, who supported Hitler's views, were allowed to continue providing church services, and Protestant pastors even allowed the Nazi swastika to be displayed in their churches. This political, ideological flag is present in a place of worship. That's the control Hitler is important on these people. And the Nazis insisted that Jews should not be baptized in the Reich Church, and that the Jewish teachings of the Old Testament should be excluded from Christian teachings. But not all Protestants kind of accepted this. A few spoke out against Hitler, and the famous one that I want you guys really to know is Martin Niemöller. Now, Pastor Martin Niemöller, when it's got pastor in front of him, that he's always going to be a Protestant priest, a Protestant man. In 1933, he actually was the one who set up the Pastors Emergency League, the PEL, to campaign against Nazi actions. Now, he's sent to concentration camp in 1937, and the PEL is banned. But this is the guy, Martin Niemöller. It's a great example of how people pushed back. He's the one, remember, who said, when they came for the communists, I did nothing. When they came for the Social Democrats, I did nothing. When they came for the trade unions, I did nothing. When they came for the Jews, I did nothing. So when they came for me, there was no one to stand alongside me. There was no one to stand up for me. That's that famous kind of speech he has. That's just a recap of everything that opposes the Nazis at this point. Again, pause, read at your own leisure. So back to Niemöller. So again, opposition, what does that mean? Well, any act that is form of resistance, right? That doesn't mean people are fighting. It just means they are not conforming to Nazi ideas. It means they're not going to accept just this Nazi control, and they're actually going to do what they want to do. Okay, so people who are not just bowing down to this Nazi oppressive rule. And the Protestant churches won, and this is the Emergency League. So set up by Niemöller, they opposed the joining of regional churches into the national one. They were against the Nazi attempts to stop Jews becoming Christians and banning of the Old Testament. The confessing churches set up. This is, in effect, meant that there were two Protestant churches in Germany, so the Reich Church and the Confessing Church. 6,000 pastors joined the Confessing Church, and they opposed Nazi policy. 800 were arrested and sent to the concentration camps. Well, Niemöller himself, he was a submarine commander in World War One. In the 1920s, he opposed Weimar government and believed Germany needed a strong leader. He had voted for the Nazis in 1924 and 33. However, he was against the Nazis running the Protestant church, and he was against their policies towards Jews. The Nazis bugged his phone when he started to oppose the Nazis, and he was repeatedly arrested until he was eventually put in the concentration camps. So make sure you're on top of everything about Niemöller and how he opposes the Nazi regime, right? He could be an important one. Okay. Catholics, well, their opposition was somewhat limited, but they did voice some. So there was 400 Catholic priests who were imprisoned in something called the priest blocks in Dachau, and there were big attendances in church services, which was a defiance against the Nazis. It was an example of their refusal to conform to this Nazi control. Right, the youth groups. Okay, normally pretty good at this, guys, but again, it's useful to recap. The main youth opposition was the Edelweiss Pirates. They were based in the Rhineland. They reacted to the discipline of the Hitler Youth by, having anti-Nazi slogans, singing pre-1933 folk songs. In 1942, over 700 were arrested. And in 1944, the pirates in Cologne killed the Gestapo chief, so the Nazis hanged 12 of them. They were known as the Traveling Dudes. They used the Edelweiss flower as a symbol. They were teenage boys who pushed back against these military drills or the military discipline of the youth, or Nazi youth. They stressed their own freedoms by wearing their hair long, copying kind of American-style dress with white or checked shirts, and they would taunt the Hitler Youth. And they went on long hikes in the countryside. So a real good example of opposition here. You also get the White Rose Group, which was formed by students at Munich University in 1943. They published these anti-Nazi leaflets and marched through the city in protest and Nazi policies. They had leaders who were brother and sister Hans and Sophie Scholl. They were arrested and sent. Right, and then you got the Swing Youth. So the Swing Youth and the Jazz Youth groups were formed. These were like young people who rejected Nazi values, drank alcohol, danced to jazz. The Nazis rejected these jazz music as degenerates, called it Negro music, using their racial ideas against this cultural development. They were often monitored by the Gestapo. Now, the Swing Youth, they were middle-class teenagers from the big towns. They loved American culture. Now, because they're wealthy, they normally owned these record players, and they played these illegal records that they had from America. So Glenn Miller Orchestra, etc. They drank alcohol, smoked, danced to the jitterbug, organized illegal dances. That was their form of opposition. Now, there were a few other forms of opposition. So, the most widespread, persistent opposition to the Nazi regime came from the ordinary workers, remember, who were helped by the communists, working class, normally linked to the communists. They posted anti-Nazi posters and graffiti, organised strikes. In Dortmund, a lot of men were imprisoned in the city's jails. These were industrial workers and workers who went on strike over the high food prices, leading up to the Berlin Olympics in 1936. And you've got in 1944 a group of army officers who tried to assassinate Hitler. A bomb's even planted. It exploded, but Hitler survived. This Stauffenberg who organised it was shot. 5,000 people were executed in the crackdown on opposition. So it's just an example to show, with all this Nazi control, there were people who really pushed back against it. and there were people who, you know, went against this oppressive nature. Okay, so again, make sure you're on top of that, guys, and I'll be back with the last one soonish.